Welcome to my session, Fact or Fiction, Media Literacy in 2020. We are going to be focusing today on being able to differentiate between what is true and what is disinformation, specifically in the media. My name is Susan Brooks Young, and I have been an educator for many, many years. I was a classroom teacher, I was a site administrator, I was a technology integration specialist, and along the way, about 20 years ago, I became a member of the TCAL project cadre. And I have worked with that group for the last nearly 20 years now. I guess it is 20 years. And I'm really excited to be here today and to be able to share with you what I have been working with over the last several years in terms of media literacy and why it's important, more important than ever, for us to not only learn these skills ourselves, but also to work with our students to make sure that they have acquired the skills. The ante was upped even further this spring when, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we literally overnight switched to distance learning models. And as a result of that, teachers and students are really scrambling. They're spending way more time online than they have in the past in terms of learning. And they are busy trying to find all kinds of resources that they did not know they even needed to have 6 months ago. And as a result, we have to be even more cognizant than ever of the issues surrounding media literacy in that particular area, being able to identify accurate information, able to recognize disinformation. I want to be sure to say thank you to the sponsors of this summit, and a big shout out to Roland and to Jason Borgen from Santa Cruz County Office Education, particularly because they pulled this together so very quickly and have done such a great job with it. Thank you very much for supporting this. I believe that most of you are familiar with Zoom. If you have any questions, the most important thing to be able to find is the chat. If you can find chat, click on that. Make sure that the message is going out to everyone, and simply type your question and we'll do everything that we can to help you out. We are recording this session. If you have resources that you would like to suggest, please add them to the chat. That way people can come back later and they can find the resources that you have recommended as well. Also, there is an online agenda for today's session. So if you go, and this is listed in the information on the schedule, but if you have not, for some reason, paid attention to that, you can go to this bit.ly link down here. It is case sensitive, SECOE, Summit, and Summit is capitalized. And it will take you to a landing page that looks like what's projected here, and you just click on the Fact or Fiction Media Literacy in 2020 link, and that will take you to everything that I'm going to share with you today. We will come back to this page in just a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and move forward for right now. There are three things that I want to cover with you this morning. The first thing is, before we start talking about how to arrive at solutions for the issue of differentiating between fact and fiction, I want to frame the problem for you just a little bit, because it's a little bit different, I've learned, from what a lot of people think when they initially start dealing with this. So we'll spend a little bit of time looking at that. Then I'm going to spend the bulk of the rest of the session talking with you about two specific areas, because this is a huge, huge issue. And if you try to just go in and wrap your arms around the whole thing without some kind of framework to follow, it will be overwhelming. But I'm going to suggest to you that if you focus on looking at the ways that numbers are being used in the media and the way that words are being used, and I'll give you some very specific areas to target, then it's going to be easier for you to make a sound judgment about the reliability of what it is that you're looking at. So let's begin by framing what it is that the issue actually is based upon what I've learned to date. And I'd like to start off first with this quote from a distinguished fellow at the Institute for the Future in a report that was written by the Pew Research Center. The important thing that is said here is it's not that we're trying to get people to believe things that are not true. And that's not we, it's the people who are generating this disinformation. It's not that they're trying to get people to believe the wrong thing. What they're really trying to do is they're really trying to get people to not know when they're seeing the truth, even when it is the truth. It's a subtle difference, but it's really insidious. Because if you can get people to doubt everything, then it's very easy to lead them astray. The second point goes back definitely at least the last 20 years and maybe even before that. And I don't want to get into an overall discussion about what's happened in education over the last 20 years, because I don't want to digress and get into finger pointing and you should have done this or we should have done that or we messed up here or whatever. But I do want to say that along the way, we have somehow lulled ourselves into thinking that if we only come up with the right algorithm to tell us whether or not something is true, or if we only address what's happening in social media or in other online spaces, then we can whip this problem. And that's not true. We are not going to be able to rely on AI and machine learning to get us out of this. And the reason for that is because the crux of the problem is somewhere along the line, we stopped teaching civics. We also have not spent the amount of time that we needed to spend on critical thinking and problem solving, both for ourselves and with our students. And so while, yes, I do think that social media platforms need to be held responsible for what it is they're doing and what's happened, I also recognize that the reason that they are so successful with what they do is because our students and many adults, frankly, do not understand the basics of civics, of how this country functions. And until we get back to that, until people realize how things are supposed to work, it's going to be difficult for them to know whether or not they are. And then finally, coming from Heather Cox Richardson, is just another quote that underscores what was said in a couple of slides ago, that what's really, really effective with the use of disinformation is when it gets us to the point that we begin to believe that nobody tells the truth, that nothing matters, it doesn't matter what we do anyway, that people are going to do what they're going to do, and that's all there is to it, because that's not true. It does matter. There are things we can do, but we've got to do it. So now I'm going to share with you a couple of examples of disinformation on a pretty mild scale. And honestly, when I talk with teachers and students about this issue, I don't couch it all in political terms. And the reason for that is because disinformation is not just about politics. That's where we tend to think about it. But really and truly, disinformation works because in every facet of online life and media life in general, if we can get people to start believing really outrageous things or things that are simply not true, then when we want to target things politically, it becomes much easier to make people believe what we're saying. So I'm going to share with you some examples that I use with students and with teachers that have absolutely nothing to do with politics. Viral stories, memes are a good one. Here's one. This was out on the interwebs in February of 2019, an image of a young man who purportedly created a rice wave in his walk. And you can just decide whether or not you think that that is a true story for a second. Probably you're going to guess, because I'm holding it up as an example in this session, that no, in fact, this didn't really happen. This is a photoshopped image. The image on the right is a display that was in the window of a bakery, and it had been crafted by an artist, and they simply photoshopped the rice wave into the walk, and that was where that story came from. Here's another one. Is Apple actually selling special edition iPhone 11 Pros for $6,000? The answer to that is, well, yes, in fact, they are. And as outrageous as that may seem, the reason that they're doing that and the reason that it's $6,000 is because each one of these special phones has a little snippet of one of Steve Jobs' black turtlenecks embedded inside the case of the phone. So just when you think you can figure out what to believe and what not to believe, you run across something like this. There's a website that I'm going to recommend to you. It is called Truth or Fiction. This is not a place to take your students, but it is a place that you can go and you can look at many of the recent urban myths that are all over the web. And you can get the background on them. You can find out whether or not stories that you have heard are true. There is a live binder that is on the online agenda. The link to Truth or Fiction and everything else that I show you is in that live binder. So before we're done, I'll be sure to show you where that is. There's also a link on the online agenda to something called, to a video about something called Deepfake videos. If you're not familiar with what these are, I'm not going to show you the video now because it's several minutes long. But deepfake videos use artificial intelligence and facial recognition to take an image of someone like Mark Zuckerberg and map it out, and then have an actor read a script that gets melded from the actor's face to Mark Zuckerberg's face and makes it sound as though Zuckerberg has said something that he did not actually say. At this point in time, it's a very nascent technology, but it's one that's got a lot of people's attention because it is getting better, and technologists are having to really scramble to stay on top of it and to figure out how they're going to be able to continue to identify deepfake videos as opposed to actual videos. So when you have a couple of minutes, you may want to go to the agenda and watch this video. There are several websites also that are designed for fact checking. These are included in the live binder, and I am highlighting them here just to call them to your attention. You may be already aware of them. Truth or Fiction, I mentioned. There's also Snopes, factcheck.org, and PolitiFact. So if you have no other tools in your quiver but these, then you will be in good standing to start researching and figuring out whether or not what you are looking at when you're online is actually true or not. And then finally, I want to mention to you one book. I did not write this book. I get nothing for recommending it to you, but it is really solid. And a lot of the work I do has been based on the writings of this man, Daniel Levitin. It's called Weaponized Lies. He wrote it as a supplement to a college course that he was teaching. But it's an easy read, it's very informative, and will help you a great deal in understanding what the issues are and what to do about them. So now we're going to move into the first of the two areas I said that I would spend some time on. This one is evaluating numbers. One of the ways that people who create disinformation go about doing that is by taking data that are collected and reported and in some way, shape, or form misrepresenting them. And a lot of people don't take the time that would be helpful for them to take to really look deeply into the numbers that they see in reports, because they say, oh, I'm not a mathematician. I don't understand this. I never did statistics. But you don't have to have that depth of knowledge of math to be able to use some very simple strategies to decide whether or not what you're looking at is actually truthful. There are three things that you need to think about. First is, how were the numbers gathered? The second is, how were those numbers interpreted? And then finally, how are those numbers being reported? And within those three questions, there are 5 strategies you can use that I'm going to share with you right now. The first strategy requires nothing more than common sense. It's called plausibility. Is what's being said even possible? So, for example, I'll show this image to students and I will say, does it make sense to you if you were told that this person was 200 years old? Would you believe that? And most of the time, the kids will say, of course not. And so we'll talk about why. Why is that not plausible? And most of them will say things like, well, because I've never really heard of somebody where it was actually documented that they lived to be 200 years old. I would need some more proof than just somebody saying that to me. Common sense. Then we look at something like this. And I ask them, okay, so what if somebody's told you that they hit $1,000 or more jackpot every single time they played a slot machine? Would you believe that? Is that plausible? And sometimes they'll say, well, you know, I suppose it's possible that maybe the person only played a slot machine once and they hit $1,000 jackpot or a bigger jackpot. And so they could honestly say that every time they played a slot machine, they won that amount of money. But if they told me they played the slot machine every weekend at the local casino, I probably would not believe that, because I know, I don't know how, but I do know that casinos are set up so that they win. So then we go to the next scenario. And we talk about this claim. The claim is, and you can put in whatever state you happen to be in where the use of marijuana is now legal. It also works in California. In 35 years, the number of marijuana users in Washington state has doubled every year. Is that plausible? And interestingly, most of the time, the kids will say, yeah, I believe that, especially now that it's legal. So I will ask them to do the math and see what they think then. And the math here is really simple, because I know I told you you didn't have to be a mathematician to do it. So let's very quickly walk through this. Let's assume that 35 years ago, there was only one marijuana user in the entire state of Washington. That's being very generous, okay? But we're going to double it every year, starting with 1. And if you do that, by the time you get to the 21st year, you have over 1 million marijuana users. By the time you get to the 35th year, you have more than 17 billion users. That's larger than the population of the entire world. And yet, we see claims like this all the time, and we don't even question them. So start to be a little bit more skeptical when you see stuff like this. Ask yourself whether or not it really is possible. Here's a couple of other examples of plausibility, and we're not going to go into what your knowledge of charts and graphs and all that stuff. All you need to know is one thing. You need to know that a pie chart, the segments in it always have to add up to 100%. All you have to do is look at this pie chart, see that the numbers do not add up to 100%. Doesn't matter what it is they're trying to tell you. It's not true. It's not accurate. It's not being presented in a way that actually means anything. That's all you need to do. Here's another example of that. Same thing, only this time it goes to the other extreme. This is really cute. This looks like it might mean something, and yet all you have to do is look at a couple of the segments to see that this adds up to way more than 100%. And then if you look up at the top at the question, what are your 3 most favorite types of pie? You see that what they're trying to do is they're trying to show you responses that reflect all 3 of the choices that were indicated by each person who participated in the survey. This means nothing. So this is not plausible. We'll get into later choosing the right kind of graph to present information. But for right now, that's all you need to know. Okay, so we're going to move then from plausibility to mean, median, and mode, averages. People use averages all the time to try to make their argument about something or other. The thing that they tend to leave out, and the thing that they use to confuse people, is the fact that with averages, there are 3 different types. There's the mean, which is when you take that series of numbers that are shown on the slide, you add them up, because there's 7 numbers, you divide by 7, and you get 37.7. So that's the mean average. But then there's the median average. And the median average is arrived at by looking at the series of numbers and finding the number that is right in the middle, regardless of what it is. That is the median. And all it means is that's the number in the middle. Now, the median can be used to help you get rid of outliers. If the number series up here had maybe 150, 125 out here, those would be called outliers because they're so much bigger than everything else. Or if on the left end of the series there had been a 1 or a 2, those also would be outliers, and they would impact the mean. And by using the median, you would end up getting a more accurate representation of what most of the numbers in the series were. But if people don't tell you that the average that they're quoting is the median, you can see you can get a huge difference. And then finally, there's something called the mode that can really mess things up, because all that means is that that's the number that showed up most often in the series. If there's no number that shows up more often than any of the others, there is no mode. But in this case, even though the mean and the median are up here, the mode is only 12 because that's the number that shows up most frequently. So it's important when you read a report or someone says to you the average income is this, or the average number of people getting sick is that, you need to say average as defined by what? Are you telling me the mean? Are you telling me the median? Are you telling me the mode? In a reputable study, that information will be at the back of the study when it tells you how the study was constructed and conducted. In a less reputable report, that information won't be there. And then you're going to want to go do some research before you accept whatever's being presented as having been true. The next thing that I want to talk about just very briefly is data visualizations. And there is a video on the agenda that is really useful for adults and also to use with students. We are not going to watch that video now because it takes 5 minutes, but I just wanted to be sure to mention it to you. It's a really good, quick way to share this information with others. What it covers, and we'll go over it right now, is basically 5 ways that graphs are used to mislead you. And very briefly, the first way that graphs are used to mislead people is by doing something called omitting the baseline. And what that means is, if you look at these first 2 graphs here, the one on the left, the baseline begins at 50 rather than at 0 as it does on the right. The reason for making it start at 50 is because whoever created this graph wanted to make it appear that group A, whatever it is they're talking about, that there's a huge difference between group A, group B, and group C. So, for example, this might be someone trying to say, well, you know, those children on free and reduced lunch, they just have way more discipline problems than everybody else, and that's group A. And here's my graph to prove that. But if you look at the graph on the right, you see that even if their numbers are accurate, it is not true that there is a huge, massive difference between group A and then groups B and C. So be very careful when you see graphs like this. This is something that happens a lot in newspapers that rely on graphs to try to get their point across. The second way that graphs are manipulated is by manipulating the x-axis. And in this case, what it happens is the scale gets messed with. So here on the left, they're trying to minimize differences, and so the scale goes from 0 to 10 to 20 to 30 to 40. But on the right, when the scale goes more accurately from 5 to 10 to 15, you see that the differences are a little bit greater than what was being implied over here on the left. Or cherry picking data. The graph on the left purportedly shows the same data as the graph on the right. However, on the left, if you look down at the bottom, the data are only coming from May, June, July, and August, whereas on the right, the data are coming from 2019 to 2023, so it's some kind of a projection. And you see that this is only showing a very, very little bit, and what makes it look like something is getting better, I assume, by increasing, hopefully. Over here, that's not exactly the case. It could be actually something getting worse, too. But it's important to make sure that the data that are being represented are actually the full and complete picture, not just a little bit of it. Using the wrong graph. That goes back to the example that I gave before with the pie chart. Pie charts must add up to 100%. Rather than using that to show this information, a bar graph would be the appropriate way to do that. And the 2 samples that I gave you under plausibility, what was needed there were bar graphs. And then finally, going against conventions. Most of the times when you see maps, right now the big one is COVID-19 and rates of infection. And so when you see a map of the United States and you see states going from yellow to red, you assume that the yellow means few cases, the red means a lot of cases. And that's typically what that does mean. That's the convention. But some graphs are changed without really pointing that out closely to make the dark color, the red in the example that I gave, mean 0, and the lighter color yellow mean a larger number. So if you glanced at this map on the left and you didn't take the time to read the key, you might not gather that in fact the darkest states are the ones with the fewest incidences of whatever it is they're talking about. So just be really careful when you glance at graphs to make sure that they're not misleading you. Other ways that numbers can be skewed are through the data collection itself, using questions like these. These are, the first question is a leading question. It implies that Napoleon was short by the way that it's worded. The second one is a loaded question. Where do you enjoy drinking beer? Implies that you are a beer drinker. The third question, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the pay and work benefits of your current job, is a double-barreled question. It's asking way more than one thing. And there's no way that you can answer yes or no or whatever to everything in it. So the answer is not going to be representative of what it is you really want to know. Do you always eat breakfast? Using an absolute in a question again makes it impossible to answer accurately. And finally, do you own a tablet is unclear language. What kind of tablet? Are you talking about an iPad or are you talking about a Bayer aspirin? I don't know. So again, at the back of studies and reports, the questions that were asked in the course of collecting the data will be presented if it is a reliable study. And at that point, you can see whether or not the questions asked were framed appropriately. Because even in reliable studies done by honest people who are trying to do good work, they will ask bad questions, and you need to know that. Then finally, there's probability. And I know that people, their eyes glaze over when they think about statistics. But again, there are just a few simple things to know that can help you get a better handle on whether or not something is true. First thing is understanding the different kinds of probability. Classic probability. That's a controlled experiment where there is a defined set of answers. Rolling dice. There's only certain combinations you're ever going to be able to get, a finite number of combinations, okay? So you can predict very accurately what will happen in a situation where you can define all the outcomes, okay? So that's classic probability. Frequentist probability. That's when you set up an experiment that is controlled. You've got a control group, you've got an experimental group, you are looking at certain variables, and you are able to control those variables. It is not infallible, but when you have a controlled study, as is most often done in scientific experiments, medical experiments, drug evaluations, that sort of thing, you are able, with a high degree of confidence, able to make a prediction. The third kind of probability is called conditional probability. And that's the likelihood that B will happen given that A has already happened. So if someone is suspected, perhaps, of having pneumonia, and you know that that person has congested lungs, the probability that they have pneumonia is higher. It is not infallible, but it is higher if they have congested lungs than if they don't. Or if they have a fever and they have congested lungs, then the probability of them having pneumonia is higher. But it is still not infallible because they could have bronchitis. And then finally, there's subjective probability, and subjective probability has actually no natural symmetry. No experiment is being conducted. It is somebody's best guess. And much of what we see in terms of predictions, poll checks, for example, polling at when you call a group of people and try to figure out who they're going to vote for. That is subjective probability. It is a best guess and nothing more. So you need to know that. Okay, so those are the 5 areas to concentrate on with numbers. And this is all in the material on the agenda, and I'll be sure to show that to you before we go. We're going to move now into evaluating words. And again, there's 5 areas that if you pay attention to these 5 things, it will help you discern whether or not someone is telling the truth in articles or other reports and things that use language. The first thing you need to be cognizant of is what will trip you up more often than not is what you think you already know. So for example, you've probably all heard this quote about insanity, and you have probably also heard it being attributed to Albert Einstein. It's all over the place. People just assume, of course he said that. The reality is he didn't. The person who said that was Rita Mae Brown, and she actually included that statement in a book that a murder mystery that she wrote in 1983 called Sudden Death. So whenever somebody uses a quote, you need to check it. And there are tools that are available to you that are in the Life Binder and in another resource that I'll share with you that will help you check whether or not somebody said something. The reason this is important is quotations from famous, trusted people lend a lot of veracity to something, whether or not they ever actually said it. And people who want to prevent or who want to provide disinformation will knowingly and willfully misattribute quotations or make up quotations to make you think it must be true because somebody you trust and respect said it. The second thing to look at is the reliability of the words that are being used. We teach kids to look at websites and to evaluate the design of the websites. We need to be sure that we also teach them to look not just at websites, but at everything that they read with a discriminating eye. They need to know who the author is, what the purpose was, the coverage, the depth and the breadth of that coverage, how current the information is, how objective it is, and how accurate it is. And we need to just keep repeating that over and over and over, and we need to do that ourselves. Somebody just the other day posted something on the web again, lamenting Jimmy Carter's recurrence of cancer. They failed to look and realize that the date on the article was 2018. Mr. Carter is just fine right now. So please, please, please teach your students and practice this yourselves to be sure that you're always checking the reliability of the content of what it is that's out there. Next, expert opinion. We put an awful lot of faith into what experts say. And sometimes that expertise is well placed, or that faith in that expertise is well placed. Other times it's not. In this example, if you saw the movie Hidden Figures, you're well aware of this event. Katherine Johnson, who was an amazing, amazing mathematician, was one of the Black American women who worked for NASA. And in 1962, before John Glenn took his first flight into space, he said that he would do it only if Katherine Johnson did all the mathematic calculations by hand. He did not trust the computational devices that they were using, but he trusted her. And he said if she said it was safe, that the flight pattern trajectory had been accurately calculated, he would do it. but if she said it wasn't safe, he wouldn't. She did the calculations. She told him it was safe. Fortunately, she was right. But that isn't always how things turn out. Now, in a less serious example, back in 1962, the head of arts and repertoire for Decca auditioned a guitar group called the Beatles. And he decided that guitar bands were on their way out, that they weren't actually very good, and he declined to sign them. As a result, they missed out on signing the Beatles. And then there's also celebrity branding. I know a lot of people think Tom Selleck is a great actor, but does that make him qualified to give you financial advice? It does not. And yet people are going and getting reverse mortgages because Tom told them to. So we need to be more skeptical, and we need to really think about what expertise means. There is also on the agenda an example of a student activity that you might be interested in. It's an activity where students take commercials and they watch them, and then they explain the logical fallacy that's used, as was the case with Mr. Selleck, to get people to believe that something is true or not true, and to make them want to purchase a product. So be sure to look at that as well. Occam's razor. Whenever there are two explanations, the simple one is probably the truth. Anytime you start getting into conspiracy theories and have to twist yourself into a pretzel to believe something, probably it's not true. Again, before you share, be sure that you have checked the reliability, the date, the sources, the photo sources, who the author is, and then if you think that it's actually true, go ahead and share it. But don't just click on something because a friend liked it. Now I want to take you to the online agenda, because there are a couple things that I want to be sure to show you. So here we are. And there's the video about deepfakes, the video about data visualization, the video about commercial fallacies. Here is the life binder that I mentioned several times. There's an introduction, some books that I've recommended, some reports that you may want to actually look at coming from a variety of different sources, talking about how good kids are or are not at identifying fake news, and giving some solid examples as to why and what the kinds of skills are that they need. Then, in alignment with what I've talked about with you today, there's a segment on understanding numbers and some resources here to help you with that. There's some resources for understanding words and some different things that will help you with that. Also, because images and video and audio disinformation is now becoming more prevalent, there is a segment there on that, and gives you all kinds of information, particularly about deep fakes at this point. Then the fact-checking resources that I mentioned are here, along with a lot of other things. Here are some activities that you can use with students. They're ready to go, and pretty much just right out of the box. And then finally, there are some additional resources, articles, things I didn't know where to put anywhere else. And so that is available to you. You are welcome to use it and to share it with whomever you like. And then the final thing I want to show you is a classroom resource. That's here, the bottom link on the agenda. This is a website that I've created for a book that I've written that will be coming out the end of this year. And the website includes instructional activities for students. This is targets middle school, but you can easily ramp them up for high school, or you can scaffold them to use them with upper elementary students. And the activities fall into the two areas that I mentioned today: assessing words, and it goes right through the topics that I went through with you today. verifying quotes, expert opinion, and then some other ones that I didn't mention, but they're all there for you. And then assessing numbers. These go through the 5 areas that I mentioned, and each one of them has a full lesson plan along with some background information, so you can click on any of them. You are able to access the entire activity plan in a PDF, or you can go through online and see each of the different areas for the lesson plan. There are also student resources. This is not a website designed for you to take students to, but you are welcome to take the material and to use it with your students in another setting. There's always a handout, and then there are online resources. So I see that I have managed to talk the entire time. We have 2 minutes. Roland, if you're still there, do we have any questions that came up that I could address quickly for you?
No questions, Susan. We had people sharing links. Thank you, Peggy, so much for following along and bringing web resources in to support some of this. As always, Susan, I am just amazed that you do such a good job talking for, you know, a long time without the interaction of a audience. And I know that's not easy. So
Nah.
congrats, because you did an excellent job today. And so timely. I was just putting in the chat with all the COVID-19 stuff flying around on social media. You don't know truth from fiction, and you know, it's tough. But that's for me. I'll be quiet here for a minute, see if somebody else wants to come on with a question.
I've also put my email account in the chat in case anybody has a question that they think of later. And I'm so happy that you found this useful, and I really don't like being a talking head, but I'm glad that I did not put you to sleep. And if any questions do come up, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I would be pleased as punch to talk with you and share further resources with you. So thank you all very much. It is 10:25, and I think I'm supposed to let you have a quick break and go on to your next session. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for your time.
So thank all of you for coming. Go back to the schedule. You probably already know where you want to go next. We have lots of great sessions lined up, and we'll thank you for coming out for the summit, and I'm sure we'll see each other online. And thank you, Susan, for a great presentation.